In the horrors of the trenches, death comes quick and unexpected. A sniper from a hidden dugout, a death commando in the night taking out a sentry, the artillery shell you don't hear, and of course a myriad of bullets with a myriad of names from an entrenched machine gun during a frontal charge. For those that fall, their war is done. They've passed to, hopefully, a better place. Unless you're one of those poor bastards in the heretic legions, doomed to have died upon sacred ground. Good luck to you, as you're now doomed to become a trench ghost for all eternity. Until you're put out of your misery by some random yeoman or azeb, and you fall to ash. Still sentient, but at least you can travel now. And honestly, as a member of the heretical legions, you probably deserved it. Plus, if you died normally, you had an eternity being tortured by demons to look forward to. So good luck, you poor bastard, it was a lose-lose. But what about those left behind? The battle brothers and sisters, the mothers, sons, fathers, and daughters. The grief of that loss bites hard. And in New Antioch, there is a unit that turns that grief into furious anger against the heretics. Greetings, guardsmen and yeomen. Today we're going to be focusing on the Duke's personal special operations force, the Red Brigade. We'll be going through the lore that we have on this unit, their armor and weapons, some of the missions they can go on, and their historical connection. Plus just why are they so trusted by the Duke, despite all the worry from Papal High Command. The Red Brigade is the special operations force used by the Duke of New Antioch. They are tasked with some of the highest demanded missions, and conduct operations far behind enemy lines. They are said to be fearless in the face of death. They either complete the mission or die trying. As far as the real world is concerned, there are several units that can be seen as inspiration for the brigade. Though it should be stated that special operations forces of World War I were not the same as how we think of special operations forces today. They were far less organized, as the more organized units didn't really show up until World War II, with the formation of the Special Operations Executive and the Office of Strategic Services. The Special Forces of the Great War were much more ad hoc. Commands began to realize the potential of a single squad in sabotage and intel-gathering operations within the trenches. The first units were mostly independent volunteer units, made up of selected soldiers from rifle platoons. Mostly on a per-mission basis, they had no direct command structure, but would be led usually by a lieutenant. As trench raiding tactics proved more and more effective, generals began to organize specific units for this task. Notably, the Austrian Jaeger Corps became one of the first official trench raiding units, and be assigned to a normal rifle platoon to lead attacks and conduct raids in between assaults. You also had units like the Stormtroopers of Germany and the Arditi of Italy. These units can claim to be more organized, though they're more along the lines of shock forces rather than what we think of as special operations forces like SAS or Delta Force. One unit I believe heavily inspired the Red Brigade is that of the Arditi. The Arditi were Italy's answer to the shock troops. Inspired by the Austrian Jaeger Corps and other Central Powers shock forces, Italy began to recruit volunteers for their own unit. Known as the Arditi, also known as the Daring Ones. Meant to act mostly as trench raiders and line breakers, they would be the first to attack an enemy trench or fortification. Meant to engage the enemy in close quarters combat and bog them down until the regular infantry can arrive. The Arditi were one of the first units dedicated for this type of attack, and not just an engineering or recon role, like the earlier death brigades that Italy fielded. These volunteers were mostly sourced from the Basiglieri, Italy's light troops, or the Alpini, Italy's mountain troops. These units were chosen due to their additional training in fast attack and maneuver warfare, and their operations in intense environments. Occasionally, promising soldiers from normal infantry platoons would be chosen for this task as well, a practice that would increase as the war dragged on due to the heavy losses of the Alpini and Basiglieri. All Arditi candidates were sent to an intensive months-long training camp. There they would be taught in hand-to-hand combat drills, intensive maneuver warfare doctrine, and close quarters engagements. An Arditi was taught to never fear death. They must remain engaged with the enemy, no matter the cost. Either the enemy will be destroyed, or they'll die trying. An Arditi must never surrender or retreat. It was stated that the Arditi training facility was so intensive that multiple candidates died during the field exercises. The recruits of the RDT took the ideals of fearlessness to heart, their very motto being victory or we all die, and this happened on several occasions, with the overall casualty rate of the RDT being 25 to 30% per mission. Keep in mind that is not the entirety of the war, per each individual RDT mission. There were even instances where an entire RDT unit was wiped out to a man, requiring the unit to be reformed with new recruits. The unit was a point of pride for Italy. They were the ideal of the perfect soldier. Fearless in the face of death and exceptionally daring. Though there is not much to their actual combat record, as the unit was used extremely sparingly during the war, and it wouldn't be till the Belgrano offensive that they had any real combat impact. After the war, they became a political tool for many people, particularly nationalist and later fascist groups. Their ideal as the perfect soldier, their fearless and daring, worked well for their propaganda, and they were even used in a nationalist coup attempt in Croatia just after the war. It was these political connections that would lead to the group being fully disbanded in 1920. The connection between the RDT and the Red Brigade is clear. They were fearless in battle and willing to engage in hand-to-hand combat. They had a drive to complete the mission at all costs. As the RDT saying goes, victory or we all die. But it's not only the RDT that inspired the Red Brigade. There were plenty of clandestine operations taking place during World War I. Many consisted of small squads sent out on trench raids and spy missions, trying to set up snipers' nests or observation posts, to capture a soldier for interrogation, or to kill an enemy officer. You also had your guerrilla forces. They operated well outside the chain of command and conducted operations far behind enemy lines. A most famous example of this has to be T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. He'd be sent to the Middle East to assist the native tribesmen in the Arab revolt. They would hit bridges, rail links, communications posts, and being a general nuisance in the side of the Ottoman forces to prepare for a Commonwealth invasion. Though it should go without saying that T.E. Lawrence's deeds are heavily romanticized, and the Arab revolt was, for the most part, getting its asses handed to him by the Ottoman forces, and by 1916 would be in full retreat. Only able to win in the war due to a lot of British money, and Faisal, the leader of the Arab revolts, recruiting over 10,000 men, allowing them to win by sheer numbers in the region. Though the tactics of T.E. Lawrence can be seen as heavy inspiration for the Red Brigade, the tactics of the blood pledges of the brigade are quite similar. They operate deep behind enemy lines, and they hound the heretics, striking hard and fast, cutting communications posts, destroying supply points, muster stations, and killing heretical commanders, all before these red-clad soldiers disappear into the trench ghost ash of no man's land. Now that we have a historical connection, let's get into the actual history of the Red Brigade, and how their unit was formed and how they operate. The brigade starts with one man, the sole survivor of the Second Battle of Acre, St. Ernest. The timeline of this battle is unknown, but due to some context clues in the overall timeline of Trench Crusade, it could have occurred between the 15th and 1700s. Ernest and his brother Wilhelm took part in the battle with the forces of New Antioch. At the height of the battle, much to the horror of Ernest, his brother Wilhelm fell in combat. Overcome with grief, Ernest donned his brother's blood-stained and battered helm and returned to the fight with a righteous fury. By the battle's end, Ernest found himself the only survivor of both sides. Taking it as a sign of divine intervention by the Almighty, Ernest slowly made his way back to New Antioch, carrying the blood-stained armor of his brother. Once Ernest returned to New Antioch, he began to preach, much to the loss of the sorrow he felt at the death of his brother and to the righteous fury and indignation against the heretics. He would even don the blood-covered armor of his brother. These sermons began to draw crowds of similarly believed men and women, the horrors of this war touching everyone, particularly in the eternal front line that is New Antioch. Soon Ernest began to recruit those most devout and inspired by his oratory, those most wanting of revenge, to form their own warband to face the heretic. Inspired by Ernest's oratory and the want for revenge for their fallen comrades, the unit marched out into no man's land, hunting down the heretics and trying to be united with their loved ones in a glorious sacrifice, but not before causing as much pain to the damned as they can. They conducted raids, disrupting of supply lines, communications posts, and the killing of prominent commanders, Ernest and his warband being credited with halting numerous heretical assaults. In time, the armor of the brigade began to be covered in the blood and gore of their enemies, soon mirroring that of their leader Ernest, with their armor being dyed in crimson red. Witnesses to this blood-stained warband began to refer to them simply as the Red Brigade. The actions of the brigade caught the attention of the Duke of New Antioch. They were impressed by their skill and cunning, their ability to operate for weeks on end in enemy territory, and of course their fury when striking the foe, their willingness to never retreat from any combat conditions until victory is achieved or they all perish. It's these traits that made them the official special operations force for the dukedom. Under the Duke's personal command, they conduct the most dangerous of missions for him. The Pontiff has his Papal Expeditionary Forces, the Duke has his Red Brigade. This position as the Duke's Special Forces has provided the brigade many privileges when garrisoned within the city. Their billet is within the Ducal Palace, and they have access to some of the best armor and weapons the Duke can provide, even gaining access to the Duke's personal hunting hounds, providing a way to track down their enemies within no man's land, and to provide companionship to the men of the brigade. When a mission is called for, all of the brigade are sent to dine with the Duke and his personal high command in a banquet known as the Feast of the Dead Men. As all know in these missions, most, if not all, will never return. This is not a concern to the recruits of the brigade. Better known as blood pledges, all are volunteers who took a personal oath upon the armor of their lost comrade or family member when arriving at the barracks of the unit. This is a grim and determined unit that accept any mission given to them, even if death is certain. For many in the brigade do not care if they die, for if they fall, they are simply reunited with their lost loved ones. This has caused no shortage of strife within the church, as many believe these missions of the brigade could be seen as a form of suicide, a mortal sin, being conducted by the blood pledges. This ideal has made no shortage of enemies within the more faithful of the church, so much so that trench clerics and those of strong faith will even refuse to serve alongside the brigade, or even decry their actions. But for some in these faithful positions, they too feel the pull of loss of their loved ones, and want to honor their fallen, so much so that they will even join up with the Red Brigade, much to the shock of their fellows and leaders, with the brigade fielding the occasional trench cleric or sniper priest. Many combat medics, tired of stitching up corpses, attach themselves to as well, to find a way to strike back to the heretics before they too fall. Should a unit of the brigade become convinced that death is certain, a time-honored tradition is carried out. A blood pledge is chosen by lot. While the others will fight to the last man, this blood pledge will return to New Antioch, with the troop's flag, along with the dog tags for everyone within the force. There they will arrive to the home of all hopes, and place them among the Chapel of Remembrance, alongside the countless other dog tags of fallen soldiers to the war. There they'll request a meeting with the Duke of New Antioch, and a traditional greeting is carried out. The blood pledge enters and states, "The Red Brigade has fallen," and the ruler of New Antioch replies, "And the Red Brigade shall rise again," before the pledge sets out on forming and recruiting the next brigade. So it has gone for decades. It is not known how many times the unit was reconstituted, but the Wall of Remembrance is covered in the dog tags of the lost members of the Red Brigade. Now let us jump into the specialized units and abilities of the Red Brigade. One of the first ones is that every lieutenant of the Red Brigade is adept at dual-wielding pistols. St. Ernest was well known for this feat, and a lot of the lieutenants seek to emulate this as leaders of the brigade. And it is quite common to see a member of the Red Brigade dual-wielding automatic pistols while running into melee combat. The brigade itself is known as fierce melee combatants, never retreating from a fight, even when ordered, until their enemy dies or they become incapacitated, only to be saved by a mercy dog. They're also known to never retreat, unless the troop standard itself falls. At that point, the members of the Red Brigade understand it is time to get out of this mission to fight another day. Their sacrifice could come later. With the brigade's very high standing within New Antioch, it allowed them greater access to specialized units for their force. The most notable of these is the Crimson Communicant. The Crimson Communicant is one of the many communicants from the Mentalist Order. The main difference is that they suffered immense trauma before taking upon the Holy Chemical Communion. Due to this, their minds are broken from their trauma, and they don't answer to anyone and can even remain comatose. This would be considered one of the many failures of the process, doomed to remain in sequestered cells. Except for one thing. At the mere mention of the Red Brigade, the communicant gains complete lucidity and informs the monks that they want to join the brigade. When this is spotted by the head bishop, they will send word to the commanders of the Red Brigade of the creation of the Crimson Communicant. The communicant is prepared to leave, and upon heading to New Antioch, they're gifted with a bell. A bell that is infused with the very sorrow of the third Metachrist, and upon its tolling it can cause all those deemed enemies to flee in abject terror and sorrow. Plus, it's quite the melee weapon. The communicant mostly has the mind of a child, and will follow the soldiers of the Red Brigade like a guard dog, joining them on their missions and defending them to the last, joining them in the glorious sacrifice of the brigade, making sure their brothers remain on the battlefield for that much longer. The brigade has also been given access to the hunting hounds of the Duke, and used them to great effect in the hunting of heretical commanders and other high-value targets, mostly using shepherds and Malinois, though there is cases of beagles, dachshunds, and even pugs marching alongside the members of the brigade. These dogs carry out numerous missions for the brigade, from operating as pack carriers of extra ammunition and grenades, to be performing as mercy dogs, being the only way that can make a member break combat, mostly dragging their incapacitated blood pledge back to behind the lines for medical support, to even being trusted companions, alerting members to dangers such as gas attacks and incoming threats like infiltrators. For someone who has lost everything and is fighting literal demons, these four-legged friends can be the only light in their world. Animals played a major role within the First World War, delivering messages with carrier pigeons, delivering supplies and rendering aid, to even limbering artillery with horses, to your standard regimental mascots. Both sides had many mascots to the regiments, famously the Irish Wolfhound or the German Dachshund. Probably the most famous of these animal mascots has to be Sergeant Stubby. Stubby was a Boston and Stafford Bull Terrier mix, found wandering the grounds of Yankee Division's training area. He endeared himself to the men of Yankee Division and became their official mascot, even following the men into France. There he provided comfort for the troops and performed several heroic deeds, including warning the men of gas attacks, finding a wounded soldier within no man's land, and even warning the sentries of an incoming attack from trench raiders, allowing the American forces to repel the attack. This granted him the honorary rank of sergeant by the end of the war. Finally, let's get into the armor and weapons used by the Red Brigade, and just how they differ from your standard New Antioch warband. The armor of the brigade is passed from one blood pledge to another, as the former falls in combat and their armor is recovered. Sometimes this armor even remains within the same family, meaning that at points, suits can be up to decades old by the time they reach the current member of the brigade. It also appears that your rank and overall combat role within the brigade can affect the amount of armor that you possess, with the lower-ranking yeomen appearing to just don their normal field grey fatigues, a standard of yeomen of all Central Europa, and their iconic red salai of an older design, though some do appear to be donning pauldrons and knee guards to provide additional armor as well, to the more heavily armored shock troopers, engineers, and lieutenants that seem to be donning full suits of armor of a more modern design. The armor worn by the Red Brigade appears to be heavily inspired by Gothic full-plate. Gothic armor came into fashion around the 15th and 16th centuries, with its first designs being developed in 1415 and peaking in popularity in 1525. The Maximilian and transitional Schlottenberg styles becoming the armor most connected with the term Gothic, seeing heavy use around the Holy Roman Empire and Italy. Inspired by the cathedrals being built in Germany and Italy at the time, the suits were meant to be more utilitarian when compared to the Greenwich armor and other more stylized designs. The most iconic feature of the Gothic armor set was that of the sallet. A sallet was a half-helm with either an ingrained visor or a simple eye slit, depending on the year and country of origin that the helm was produced in. The helm was first seen in Italy in 1460, with the more famous German variant seeing use in 1450. The Sallet helm saw wide use across Europe, with numerous variants being produced. When combined with a bevor being a neck and face guard attached to the user's chest plate, it can be pulled up to meet the visor and form a full helm, while being able to be parted quickly should the wearer need to see or speak to someone, making it much more efficient than a standard full helm. It also had additional armor plating on the back of the helmet, providing extra neck protection. We see several types of sallets in use with the brigade, most notably the German hinge sallet, seen among the majority of shock troopers, lieutenants, and engineers, to the older design with just its simple eye slit and no visor, seen among the yeomen and Lewis gunners of the brigade, to the very interesting Kettelhelm sallet. The Kettelhelm sallet was famous for its use among German and Swiss mercenaries of the period. Stated to be the most intimidating of all the sallet variants, it's definitely quite interesting. And honestly, it does look better with the bevor, but still one of the stranger designs that we can see out of the sallet variants. Another interesting aspect of Red Brigade armor is that it appears that a lot of customization and battlefield modifications have taken place. Many members sport extra armor plating in either the folds of their armor, meaning the waist of their armor, or in the back parts of their helmets, either as repair work or providing additional protection. This makes sense for a unit like the Red Brigade, whose missions can be months long, far behind enemy lines and away from friendly supply points. One other item makes them distinct among the warbands of the New Antioch, and that is what is known as a blood cloak. All members, should they prove themselves and survive several assaults and missions within the Red Brigade, are gifted a blood cloak. This yellow cloak quickly becomes stained within the blood and gore of the battlefield, and it offers a practical purpose in the form of protection from the elements of the front lines, and is proper camouflage while in no man's land. The cloak hides the form of the Red Brigade member, while hiding among the shell craters and corpses, allowing for ambushes on heretical forces. It is stated that many heretical assaults have been bogged down and blunted by these forward scouts. The cloak is also a status symbol, proving to all that know that this member is a veteran of numerous engagements within the Red Brigade. Fear the old man in the profession where men die young. When it comes to the weapons wielded by the Red Brigade, they're very similar to that of other New Antioch warbands, though they get lion's share of some of the newest weapons produced and of the best quality. The Red Brigade prefers heavy-hitting, close-quarters weaponry, namely shotguns, submachine guns, with a strong mix of machine guns, auto shotguns, and flamethrowers to provide fire support and assistance when clearing trenches, though many members are still seen with the standard bolt-action rifles, common among New Antioch warbands. When looking at the weapons of the brigade, there's some interesting mixes of style. It's clear that they're using the standard bolt-action rifle of New Antioch, which appears to be designed after the British Lee Enfield, the standard rifle for all Commonwealth forces during the First World War. Also seen in large numbers is the 1887 trench gun. Developed by the US for conflicts within the Philippines, they became a common sight among the AEF when they entered World War I, and proved so effective that the Germans attempted to declare the weapon a war crime. The auto shotgun used by New Antioch also appears to be in 1887, just with an attached drum magazine. The pistols seen in use with the brigade appear to be Mauser's C96s. Often referred to as the broom handle, they were mass-produced officer sidearms for the German army, with over 150,000 of them being produced for the First World War. They were extremely reliable and heavily loved by the officer corps, seeing use into the interwar period and later World War II. Though very hard to maintain, with extremely small parts requiring a watchmaker to conduct inspections and repairs. Another pistol seen in use with the brigade is the iconic German Luger, particularly the artillery Luger. Famous for being the first automatic pistol of the German army, it came with a 36-round drum magazine, mainly used for artillery crews to provide them extra firepower. They were highly unreliable and hard to control, which makes sense for an automatic pistol. and would even be prone to jamming when fired, due to the magazine not really being made for the pistol. The warbands of the Red Brigade also make heavy use of the Lewis gun. The Lewis gun was one of the first light machine guns produced during World War I. Originally designed by an American inventor, it would be later co-opted by the Belgians and later British forces. This LMG was a iconic weapon of World War I, with heavy use among the Allied forces, particularly the British Commonwealth. Famed for being highly maneuverable, a single soldier could carry it into combat. Within Trench Crusade, it seems to be the main light machine gun of Church forces, with heavy use across the warbands of New Antioch. Keeping to machine guns, when looking at the heavy mechanized infantry of the Red Brigade, we can see a very interesting variation of their machine gun. They appear to be carrying what is known as an MG-18 Tuft, rather than the standard Maxim, and we can tell simply by the air ventilation at the front of the gun, rather than the more standard water-cooled jacket. The 0818 Tuft was an experimental variation of the famed MG 0815, the main machine gun for the German army during World War I. Developed to combat tanks and armored cars, it would carry experimental armor-piercing rounds, otherwise known as K rounds, as its ammunition. Designed and fielded in 1918, it saw very little frontline service before the end of the war. Finally, we have the submachine guns used by the engineers. They'd appear to be some sort of mix of an MP-18. The MP-18 was created to give stormtroopers more firepower during the 1918 offensive, though most would not reach the front lines to take part in the attack and saw very little service before the end of the war. The weapon would go on to be used by police forces and paramilitaries throughout the interwar period before fully being replaced by the MP-40. The variation that we see with the Red Brigade has some very interesting additions. Namely, a front grip has been placed on the weapon, and a small shield has been added to the front of the gun. As far as the Red Brigade's melee weapons, they're pretty much the standard New Antioch weapons. Mixtures of swords, shields, polearms, particularly halberds have been seen with their shock troopers, and bayonets and trench clubs. The same weapons that are accessed by all members of New Antioch. And with this, we've reached the end of our discussion with the Red Brigade. I want to thank everybody for sticking around and listening to me talk about the different weapons, history, and real-world connections of this unit. They're a very interesting group, and I'm very excited to start playing them on the tabletop. Thank you for everybody who's stuck around. I know it's been a bit since my last video. We're going to be trying to keep it to at least 1 or 2 videos a month. That way I can properly research these topics for you guys, making these videos of a much higher quality than they were originally. And with that, I will be going back to relook at some of the older videos to try to smooth them out and make them better for you all. So keep an eye out for that, and also keep an eye out for the next one about infantry weapons. And if you're all interested, I'm also going to break into some of the other worlds that we can talk about. Namely, Age of Sigmar, fantasy, those types of things, as we see a lot of history and lore with those guys as well. Along with getting to get back into 40k occasionally to talk about the Guard. So again, I have to thank all of you guys for subscribing, for hanging out, for commenting, all those things. It's been a lot, and I'm glad that it's at least proving that I'm doing something right. So thank you guys again, and I gotta get back to the archives. So, see you all.